Welcome to the Vandy Sports Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lee. Our guest today will be Willy Daunic of 102.5 The Game. Willy, of course, was a former Vanderbilt baseball and basketball player. We thank our sponsor, Wellspire, Nashville's Learning and Development Center. Wellspire offers professional and personal development opportunities in a beautiful facility in the Gulch neighborhood. Stop by for an event with world-renowned speakers or host an off-site event that will wow your team or your clients. We thank our co-sponsor, the Well Coffee House, which turns coffee into water and has a mission to bring clean water to the world. Our news presented by Sutherland & Belk, a Nashville-based injury law firm. Sutherland & Belk is committed to fighting for those who've been injured in car, motorcycle, and truck accidents. Check them out at sbinjurylaw.com. The kickoff for the Vanderbilt Ole Miss game 2 weeks from now has been set. That will be 6:30 p.m. Of course, Vanderbilt plays Northern Illinois first. Ole Miss has a road trip to Alabama this week preceding the Vanderbilt game. Our guest line, brought to you by Boll & Branch, started by Vanderbilt graduates Scott and Missy Tannen. I've slept on their sheets for years. They're amazing. Had no idea how comfortable they could be until I got them. They're fair trade certified. That means they're made under safe conditions by men and women treated and paid fairly. Try them for a month. You can return them for free, but you're not going to want to. Once you get the sheets, get the mattress. That was voted best mattress of 2018. Go to bollandbranch.com. That's spelled B-O-L-L. Enter the promo code Vandy to get $50 off your first set of sheets. Willy Daunic is with us now. He is the play-by-play voice of the Nashville Predators. He is host of Darren, Daunic, and Chase on 102.5 The Game. He is a former Vandy boy. He's a former Vanderbilt basketball player. Willy, thanks for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing well. Chris, great to talk to you as always.
I have to ask, was thinking about this morning. Is it cooler now to be the voice of the Predators or a former Vandy boy?
You know, I take a lot of pride in both. It's hard to, I've never really thought of it that way. You know, I just think for your school, you're always going to be identified. And it's really fun for me to have some of the older Vanderbilt fans actually come up to me every now and then and say, I can remember watching you play, because it's getting further and further removed from that time. My time at Vanderbilt was huge because it opened a lot of windows for me to get into the business. Not that I was any kind of a standout player, but at the time in the early 90s, and people that are newer to town may not really get the context of this, but Vanderbilt athletics was really at the centerpiece of everything going on in Nashville sports. So very, very different than it is now with the Predators. But I also take a lot of pride in being part of the Predators organization since the very start and watching it grow from the very, very beginning, before they had any players or even any coaches or anything, just watching it grow from the very day that they announced an expansion team, and then being fortunate enough to be part of the radio team their first season. So both are really, really sources of pride for me.
I had a really funny conversation with Chip Frederick about this. He brought this up. He said when he was at the College World Series a couple of times, people had mentioned to him about playing at Vanderbilt and those sorts of things, and like the kids around him would sit up and take notice, and it's like his stature went up immediately in the eyes of everybody. He had a laugh. He said, I don't think people realized that being a Vandy boy then and being a Vandy boy now weren't exactly the same thing.
Oh, people have no idea. I always enjoy having conversations with the current players about that, because it's so hard to visualize for those particular people what it was like before, because they just have no context, because it's now been close to a generation where the image of Vanderbilt baseball is what it is today. But before, and sometimes, like, I don't want to underrate our program at the time, because the SEC was just as powerful as it is today. For example, the 4 years that I played, there were 3 national champions out of the 4 years. Georgia won 1, LSU won 2, and every year there's 3 or 4 teams that are contending for a national title going to Omaha. So we had our moments. We were very, very talented, but just not deep enough to do what the guys do today.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You guys had some really good players and several that went on to the pros. You just didn't have enough of them.
That's exactly what it was. And our facilities were so far behind. And really, that's what we joke about a lot, is that, there was no press box. There was no clubhouse per se. We were all jammed into a locker room across the way in Magoogan. I'm still not sure how we got 30 guys in the space that we got into back then. It wasn't attached to the dugout or anything. There was a barbed wire fence around the outfield, for example. And also, instead of a warning track, there was basically a hill that was in the place of the warning track. So an outfielder could go back and trip on the hill and actually fall down. And at times the ball would drop, just because a routine ball would drop because somebody was backing up on a ball and didn't see the hill coming. So there was all kinds of little quirks in the park. It was fun in a way, but you were certainly envious when you went on the road at some of the parks you got to go play in.
Let's talk football for a few minutes. Your impressions of the LSU game and Vanderbilt's effort within that game.
I think first, LSU was as advertised over the summer at SEC Media Days. They were talking about this young man, Brady, this whiz off of the Saints staff that was going to revolutionize the LSU passing game. And everybody kind of nodded their head and said, okay, we'll see. I've heard this before, and it never really seems to happen. But this guy really has changed the look of LSU, and give them all the credit. They've always had wide receivers that can run. But now Joe Burrow seems to have taken a step forward, and it was hard to contain those guys. The only thing I would say is I would have liked to have seen more plays contested by Vanderbilt defensively. It was a little too easy early in the game. But like Georgia, I did like that the guys kept fighting. They played all the way to the end. They did have their moments. And now, as I've been saying for the last couple of weeks, Chris, you're really not that far off. If right on pace for what you thought you would be. 0-3 was not unrealistic when you saw that schedule come out. So really, this is, I think, the biggest week of the season is to get right and use what you've found out about your team against these three teams to play a good game on Saturday. Because if you lose on Saturday, then a lot of hope goes down the window. I think everything changes if you don't get the job done on Saturday.
Yeah, I've said this on a podcast or two recently. The effort and the execution and the intelligence with which they have played and all kinds of things have not met my expectations. So that's not the part. The 0-3 is not the part that bothers me. It's that. Having said that, though, look, from here on out, it is a new season, and if they'd lost all three of those games 50-0, it really wouldn't matter if they could still scrape together, say, 7 wins in the end, because that would be progress for Derek Mason. That would be the winning season that has evaded him, and I really think you're right. Now, I think you look at the schedule, and the Purdue one is one that was eminently more winnable than maybe we thought before the season, and maybe we could debate some of the others, whether they got tougher or easier. I don't know that things have markedly changed. I don't see a lot of easy wins on the schedule, but the point again, here on out is really what matters.
Well, they've got to play better. I think the good part about having this stretch of games at the beginning of the season is that you can evaluate your team against the very, very best in the country, and you've got to use that to your advantage. For example, not being able to cover LSU is no different than anybody that's played LSU so far. They're averaging they were averaging over 50 points a game coming in. So it's not like, they did what they've been doing that to everybody. And I think they're going to continue to do that to a large degree. I don't know if they'll score 50 every week, but they're going to be tough to stop. So I think the question is, when you start going up against more comparable talent, what does your talent look like? And as you said, what does your execution look like? Key plays. When you getting the other team into third down and then playing well on third down and on offense, staying on time, and converting third downs or converting 4th and 1 when you have a chance for a quarterback sneak, or if you're going to give the ball to your best player, being able to pick up that yard. That's where I think you have no margin for error against Georgia and LSU, but those are the kind of things that can separate you from winning a game against a team that's more evenly matched with you in talent. So that's where I think it's going to be important Because, what you can say, for example, in the first half, when I'm not sure, was it 14-7 or maybe 21-7? I mean, you're trying to stay in the game. You have a nice play up the field to Lipscomb, and then you've got that 4th and 1, you don't pick it up. I just would have loved to have seen them if they could have hung around, scored on that drive, and just stay in the game a little bit longer. That's the kind of thing that can pay dividends down the road, and that's the kind of play you have to make if you're going to beat the Tennessees, the Kentuckys, the South Carolinas, those swing games that are going to be the difference in winning 6 or 7 or 4 or 5.
You talked about LSU's coaching situation. I see Ed Orgeron as a guy that was a punchline 10 years ago, and I think he was a punchline when he took that job. Well, right now he's not. And you talked about LSU fundamentally changing its identity. You didn't use those words, but that's what's happened with its passing game. I look at Derek, and I mean, I'd say there's evidence across on the other sideline that a coach can change his identity. I've said for a long time, and feel free to disagree, right now they are better set up to shape their identity around offense and do some things. And I think that Derek has always been worried about his defense. I think at this point you have to kind of throw that out the window and play to your strengths. Would you agree or disagree with that?
I don't think I'm enough of a aficionado in analyzing an offensive system to answer that intelligently. I do think the jury is still out on the Vanderbilt offense and the cohesiveness. I'm not really seeing the flow between the three weapons that I think we've all envisioned. If you can spread the field with those three guys, you should be able to get good matchups, and then you mix in the other guys who I think are capable of making a play here and there. I haven't seen the flow yet that I would like to see. So regardless of the philosophy, and I think too, we're still getting to know Riley Neal. He's been under a lot of duress. He has flashed pretty good talent. He's made some throws that impress you for sure. But this goes back to our theme, I think, of this is where it really counts for sure. This is a gotta have it game on Saturday against Northern Illinois, and you would like to see that offense really look good and start to build that rhythm and that balance that I think we all envisioned.
Yeah, the flow and the rhythm is the thing that, as I've watched their offense the last few years, I just don't think they can establish consistently. They will go stretches where they will punt 3 or 4 possessions in a row, and then they'll go stretches where they'll string together 2 or 3 touchdowns. But it just always seems to run hot and cold a good bit. And here's a stat that sort of illustrates it. Saturday, they had 7 3-and-outs and 2 other possessions and ended in turnovers. And I think that's the part about their offense that bothers me, is they never can find consistency.
I think, too, one thing that I'm looking forward to is what does the offensive line look like against Northern Illinois? And can they get a little bit healthier there? I know that a couple of key linemen, one in particular, has been out the entire time, and we don't have your left tackle. I mean, that's an important piece, as the Titans are finding out as well. So you got to hope that you can grow some in that area. That has not made it any easier on Riley Neal, particularly against Georgia and LSU. He has not had a whole lot of time to survey the field. But I agree with you that you want to avoid more 3-and-outs. Again, the level of competition should help in that area. And so I guess we'll have to wait and see what it looks like on Saturday. But I would say this: they have not lost any huge weapons. I think that was a big fear. When you lose, we were talking to Rick Stockstill of Middle Tennessee, who opened the season, I believe, last year against Georgia. He was saying he lost 2 or 3 starters for the whole year in that game, and a couple other guys that played a lot for extended period of time. Although Vanderbilt has had a couple injuries, you're always going to have injuries no matter who you play. I like that they're going into this stretch of the season not having too much attrition based on the difficulty of the first 3 weeks.
Yeah, and the offensive line is an interesting angle. Sometimes injuries turn out to be long-term blessings, and I think losing Devin Cochran for 3 games could end up being that. Here's what I mean. they have not liked to substitute linemen and give other guys a chance. And there may be good reasons for that. Maybe there weren't good reasons for that. I don't know, but it just was. And the concern that I have heard all along was that they were really concerned about the drop-off between their first and second team, but you don't know until you play guys. And I think they got a little bit of a pleasant surprise. Jonathan Stewart, we put Pro Football Focus grades on the site, and if people subscribe, they can see them. And if they don't, that's one of the things that we offered that maybe would be an incentive to check out. But bottom line is Stewart's played really well the last 2 weeks, and he really hadn't played at all in his career until then. So that's one that worked out, I think, better than anybody imagined. Tyler Steen continues to play at a solid level on the other side. Dan Dawkins has done some good things in stretches. He'd never played till this year. And now you get Cochran back, who everybody knew was their best lineman. All of a sudden, you have 3 tackles that were playing at a pretty respectable level. When going into the season, you thought you had one and you weren't sure about anybody else. Here's my point. Now, all of a sudden, where depth was an issue and they didn't know if they could even find 5 who could suffice, maybe they've got 6, 7, or 8 who'll work, and I don't know how that translates. If that means maybe you move Steen inside to guard and shore up guard, which is frankly right now a weaker spot than tackle. But just getting back to my original point, I think that is one really interesting aspect of the team is now that you've seen some guys play that you didn't know about, you're a little bit pleasantly surprised by the answers, I think, if you're Vanderbilt, and I think that only helps going forward.
I think it's a good point. And now the question is, can those guys build on this experience and maybe the confidence that comes with going up against the very, very best in the country? But now you've got to do it every week. You've got to be consistent over the long haul. That's the next challenge. And that kind of leads me into, I think, the biggest mental test for this week. You know, if this team goes out and they're hungry for a win and they are, you know, they can't wait to get out there and go up against more comparable talent to show everybody that they're a good football team, then they'll be fine on Saturday. But if they relax and say, oh, now we're not playing LSU, we're not playing Georgia, and they just show up and think that that's going to be enough to beat Northern Illinois, that's the trap that they have to avoid falling into. And really, I would say their season may be riding on it because 0-4, I don't care how good you are or how favorable the schedule might be, it's tough to dig out of that hole. So this game is the biggest game of the season when you get down to it.
I'm going to go ahead and go into the mailbag, which is sponsored by Vanderbilt fan and independent insurance agent Josh Minton of Brentwood. If you're in the market for auto, motorcycle, home, renters, or landlord insurance, or even life or commercial insurance, Josh can help you. Call him 615-933-1979. Email him at josh@hqinsurance.com. Follow him on Facebook at facebook.com/JD Minton HQ. He's my insurance agent. Hope you'll make him yours as well. Mr. Vandy says, with the defense doing so poorly right now, do you still think they can make it to a bowl game?
Definitely. I think they can. I think the offense may have to pick them up in some weeks. I think they're going to give up some points. I think I would like to see them improve steadily over the course of the season. I think that's going to be important. They've got some young players that I think are going to be back next year and some the following year. They need those guys to build off this experience. But yeah, I think absolutely. If you look at some of the other teams in the SEC East in particular, I still think that there are teams that you're going to face that if you have your act together, you're going to have a shot. Now, I mean, somebody I know right now, Tennessee, their morale is very low. Kentucky struggled big time last week at Mississippi State after giving a game away against Florida that they had in the palm of their hand. How dominating is Florida? I think the jury's still out. They've done a good job. And then obviously South Carolina's got some issues as well. Those games are going to be all very difficult for Vanderbilt, and I'll throw Ole Miss in there as well. But we've known that from the start. And I think I feel the same way about those games now as I did before the season. So I think the story has yet to be written.
I think Derek's strength as a head coach is keeping the boat from capsizing, so to speak. In other words, he's had some stretches where his teams have looked bad. And now this one's a little different because of the opposition, but they've had some stretches where they look bad against, not so good teams in the past. And I think you might lump Purdue in there at year's end. We'll see. But here's my point. Just when you think things are about to sink, Derek has had a habit of keeping players engaged enough to where at the end of the season they're beating an Ole Miss, they're beating a Tennessee, they're getting bowl eligible, and really completely changing the way that we look at the seasons he's had. What do you see as the things that he has done there to keep that happening year after year?
I think just in a very general sense, I think they like him as a person. I think they want to do well for him. And that sounds like such a simple thing, but I do think I see teams in different sports at different levels that when things go bad, if they just bottom line don't like the coach and don't really believe in everything, that's when teams kind of crumble. But I think people love the substance of Derek Mason. He's a good person. He's got amazing enthusiasm that is contagious. And I think during the tough times, I think he does a good job of keeping the route, and he has not lost the team in that respect, if that makes sense. It's a simple thing, but I think it's an extremely important thing. And I think, too, looking big picture, when guys come back, 4 years, 10 years, 15 years after they're done with a program, the experience they've had with that coach is a very, very important thing. If they just didn't like the guy, it didn't like playing for him, that's not what any university wants. You want your players when they come back to say, you know what, we didn't win every game, but I loved my experience. I love the players I played with, and I enjoyed the coaches. The coaches were good people, and it set me on the right course. I think that's more important than we make it out to be sometimes.
Yeah, your answer is exactly mine. And I will say this, too. I've mentioned this before. You look at the transfer market, okay? They have been able to pick up several useful pieces, in some cases, key pieces over the past few years. And I'm trying to think of guys that they lost that they could have used. And I think of Bailey Grenier and I think of Jared Southers. But those guys might have just been backup offensive linemen. Now, maybe Southers would have started this year to start the season. In fact, I'd say he probably would. Now, who knows how that would have turned out. He never could have. Well, he was never able to grab a job full-time for himself before. But my point is, I think that's a place where it really shows that if they didn't like playing for Derek, and again, that doesn't make some of the other criticisms about him invalid, but I do think that is his strength, and it's the glue of how he holds things together that maybe is, as you said, sort of the main explanation for why they finished the way they do.
Yeah, 100% agreed. And you're right. There are weaknesses. There are things that I think can be better. But I think the baseline, that is his biggest strength.
Yeah, and it'll be interesting down the stretch to see how many teams on that schedule either fall apart or lose interest. I mean, Tennessee is always an animal into itself. Ole Miss is a school that's had some issues from time to time. Kentucky, how interested are players in playing for bowl eligibility after they beat Penn State in the New Year's Day Bowl last year? I think that is going to be a real key down the stretch, not just how they perform, but how engaged other teams are. South Carolina being another one. Does the schedule beat them down by the time they play each other? I think that's going to be a very interesting dynamic to the schedule. And as bad as it was to start the way they did, I think it's also ideal in some ways to end it the way they do.
Definitely. And that's why this game on Saturday is so important, because you and I in this conversation can look ahead to those games and look ahead and say, I was keeping a close eye on that Ole Miss game. How would they fare against California coming all the way over to Oxford? How's their morale? You're looking at all that stuff. But this team has got to make sure that they are focused in this game against Northern Illinois, because Northern Illinois, if you look at their program, and I am a proud former Vanderbilt sideline announcer that did a game at Northern Illinois. That's a fun place to go to. And they've had their years, though. If you look at they've had a good program over the years. And the MAC, of course, is famous for pulling upsets. So it's no gimme on Saturday by any stretch they're not a 3-touchdown favorite in this game. And so I think there's a lot of wait and see. So they've got to prove that they can get it done against Northern Illinois. That's step one. Then you can really start talking about, how do they match up with these other swing teams in the league that whose seasons can go either way, just like Vanderbilt's.
Mac Fled has a question that we have hit often, and I'm going to follow up with the question of my own after you answered the first round here. He says, if you were the Vandy athletic director, what would you do after seeing the home games against Georgia and LSU at Vanderbilt Stadium? And I think, obviously, by that he means the crowd breakdown.
I would say welcome to the challenge of what it's like in Nashville, Tennessee, for any sport entity. I would put the Titans in there. I would put the Predators in there. I think you got to fight for your fans. I like that Malcolm Turner has already done some things. You can, if you can't make the argument that he hasn't done anything, right? He's announced, this is our plan. This is what we're trying. He's put on the website, give me your feedback. I want to hear it. So he has not walked into an easy situation where you just say, well, you just spend a little bit more money here or, just win the games there, because it's much more complex than that. I do wonder down the road when the new stadium is built for the soccer. And it dawns on me when you watch, let's take the LA Chargers who are basically homeless right now while they build this huge palace out in Los Angeles that they're eventually going to play in. But is a smaller stadium the wave of the future, especially for schools like Vanderbilt that don't have massive fan bases? Because it's hard enough, for the big schools to fill 75 or 80,000 seat stadiums. They're all experiencing it to some degree. So these are all things that I think about. It's a tough job. And so, at some point you just got to hope that the Vanderbilt fans themselves, some of it's on them. You got to want to go. You got to have that little, that little connection to say, yeah, I know it's easy for me to sit here and go, but for lack of a better term, the kids need support, right? You have to go. You have to make a little bit of effort to go. And then that same effort's got to be put in from the school as well, with the facilities and doing everything you can to make that game day experience a good one.
Well, I want to close with a thought here. I look at Vanderbilt baseball and the brand that it has built, and that should be the standard and the example and the guiding light for everything. Now, maybe you can't get where that has gotten, but if you aim there, and even if you get halfway, you're in a much better place than you are now. And I look at what Tim's done, and obviously winning has built that brand. If they're not winning national titles and SEC titles, their brand isn't what it is. But at the same time, he brought their brand out of nothing, and he used something before there were wins to get the elite talent that eventually got them wins. I guess what I'm getting at is, aside from the wins there, what are the things that they can use to build their brand and grow incitement until the wins follow that kind of take it from there? Is there anything that they can do with the situation they have that's aside from wins and losses to get people in the stands and excited again?
I think Derek Mason's done a very good job. I have watched him work his tail off, putting in the time to do interviews to anybody that wants to talk Vanderbilt football with him. I've seen him at SEC Media Days go up and down Radio Row, spend an extra day there. If you notice, on the various radio stations, which of course is easy, I follow this because I'm one of them that has him on every week. Of course, we've had him weekly through the tough times. Not everybody can say that, but basically, if you want to have him on once a week, even on the same station at different times of the day, different days, he'll make the effort to talk to you. So he's doing everything he can to sell the program. I would hope that Malcolm Turner and his staff continue to build and look at all these areas that we've gone over and over. How do you make the best of the stadium right now? What are some of the things in the short term you can do to make that stadium the best possible atmosphere that you can? fighting the other team's fans is not going away anytime soon. And you watch when Tennessee plays Georgia, you're going to see a ton of Georgia fans. Last night, Monday Night Football, Washington Redskins. Washington, D.C. is not around the corner from Chicago. There were a ton of Bears fans there, a ton. When the Bears scored and they dominated the game early, it sounded like I had to do the double take to make sure the game was not in Chicago. So teams fans on a weekend, they are going to travel, especially to a place like Nashville, which is a fun place to go. So it is a fight. It is not a simple answer. And I would like to challenge the Vanderbilt fans too, it's not just sit back and say, well, I'll go when X happens, or when the stadium is new, or when they get me better concession stands or better bathrooms. I mean, in the meantime, you got to go, or else this is going to continue to happen. And the team's got to do its part and play good football.
That is a really good point that you bring up, and I've not really thought about it like this now, but there's a really weird dynamic going on in sports that it's almost like fans of home teams in general are showing up in some ways less than ever, but travel for teams to other venues, road crowds are almost bigger than ever. You see it with the Titans. You certainly see it with Vanderbilt. You see it with the Red Sox a lot of times, although maybe that's an issue of sometimes not being able to get tickets in Fenway. But I'm glad you brought that up. It had never occurred to me. It's almost like across all sports, travel to venues by visiting teams almost seems to be at an all-time high.
I think for some teams, for sure. And teams that are sort of riding a wave of success. And the Chicago Bears would be one. They had a great year last year, and their fans are pumped up. And I'd put LSU and Georgia in that category. There's a high level of excitement. They're pumped up. They got a chance they're hungry for national championship kind of stuff. So their fans are going to go. But I do see this, and I appreciate the Vanderbilt fans that do this on Twitter, that if they have extra tickets, they're looking to find other Vanderbilt fans to give the tickets to or even sell the tickets to. But it is a fair point to say, I know it's easy sometimes to make a buck because this happens again with the Titans, with the Predators. It's not a Vanderbilt thing. But you can make a lot of money off of these fans for teams that are riding high. If you want to make some money, that's fine. But understand that you are contributing to what it looks like on Saturday if you sell to the other team's fans. That is part of reality. I know it's economics, but if you want, you can't do that and then complain about the atmosphere not being very good.
Willie, I know you need to run. I know you've got hockey season around the corner. I want to give you a chance to talk about that. Tell us about the Predators when they open, promote your Twitter account, your shows, anything else like that you'd like to discuss before we end the program.
Well, we have our first broadcast, our first telecast of the season, which is the final preseason home game on Wednesday night against Carolina, an exciting team that really took the league, the Eastern Conference, by storm last year. No pun intended. They had a great year, unexpectedly so. And so they're coming in on Wednesday night. And I will say we had a game on Saturday at Bridgestone Arena, just the run-of-the-mill preseason game, but it was a fantastic atmosphere. The crowd was really into it. The Predators won in overtime. It doesn't mean anything in the standings, but the crowd was really excited, hungry, and I think that was a great sign. So Wednesday night on Fox Sports Tennessee, you can watch me and Chris Mason and Kara Hammer, Lindsey Rowley, Terry Crisp. We'll get our preseason rust off, and then everything starts a week from Thursday with the home opener, which is the opening game of the season against the Minnesota Wild, a week from Thursday, October the 3rd. So we're excited about that. In the meantime, we'll be talking a lot of Vanderbilt today on the show from 10 to 2. Mitch Light will join us, the Vanderbilt sideline announcer, from 12 to 1. We'll actually be at Predators practice over at Centennial. So 10 to 2 weekdays on ESPN 102.5 The Game.
Willie, I saw the pictures on Twitter of the game you spoke about. I think they were playing Tampa Bay. Is that correct?
Correct.
And how many people were actually there? Because the shots that I saw of the crowd, that wasn't the full arena, but it almost looked like it was packed.
I don't know if they announced the sellout. If it wasn't, I don't think every seat was full, but it was close. I mean, for It felt like a regular season game in a lot of ways. I thought, given the fact it was a preseason game, tremendous participation by the crowd. And the ones that were there, that definitely made some noise. So as far as butts and seats, it had to be within 1,000 of being full. And I'm not sure if they announced the sellout or not, but I think the fans are hungry to get this thing started.
Willie, thanks for joining us. We'll catch you again next Tuesday.
Okay, sounds good, Chris.
He is Willy Daunic of 102.5 The Game. I'm Chris Lee, the host of the Vandy Sports Podcast. Keep on listening. We've got a couple more episodes we will drop later in the week.